If this is your first Kurios conference, this is an initiative of the congregation here locally, and it's their desire, I understand, to run this yearly. And if you are interested, the name Kurios, you might be curious about that, but actually that's the Greek word for Lord. So they've named it for the Lordship of Jesus Christ, and that's a wonderful way to begin our topic this morning as we think about the issue of hope. I do want to begin by saying that, Joshua said, Dad, I've got these ideas for the Kurios conference, and we want to go through those qualities that are listed in 1 Corinthians 13, faith, hope and love. And we've already done faith, but, we want you to do hope. And I thought, all right. But initially I thought I'd drawn the short straw because, if you think about those three things mentioned in 1 Corinthians 13, when it comes to faith, well, we are saved by grace through faith, Ephesians 2:8 and 9. And so the issue of faith, trust in Christ alone, brings in all of the issues of salvation and the way we become Christians and come into the presence of God and are made right with Him. So there's a rich theology about that. And then, of course, love, the third one. Well, Paul says himself that the greatest of these three is love. And he lists the characteristic qualities of love in 1 Corinthians 13. And of course, all of those characteristics are revealed in Jesus Christ and God's act of sending Christ into the world. John 3:16, God so loved the world that he sent His Son. And then sandwiched in between those two is hope. And what are we to say about that? But the more I looked at this and the more I read about it and studied it, I actually think that it's a great privilege to be able to speak about this subject. And I hope at the end of these talks you'll agree with me that hope is really something wonderful, and it's at the very heart of the gospel message. So in your notes that you've been handed out this morning as you came to the conference, there is a sort of a cut down version of these talks, and hopefully there's enough room for you to write notes in addition to what's there if you'd like to. And if you've got a Bible with you, we will be turning to various Bible passages along the way also. So this is a large subject, the subject of hope, and we can't say everything that could be said about this in 4 talks, but I've had to narrow it down. So let me give you a thumbnail sketch of where we're headed so you understand the ground that we are going to be covering together. In this first lecture, I'll be looking at the issue of what is hope, trying to define it, trying to get to what it is, and explain a little bit about why this is so important for us, not only as Christians, but for everybody, Christian or not, who's in this world, why hope is very, very important. In the second lecture, after morning tea, we'll come back to look at the issue of hopelessness. Discouragement, despair, why it's in the world, why so many people experience it, why depression is so prevalent, where all this has come from, and what the Bible has to say about that subject. So that's the second one. The third lecture is on the true source of hope. So we'll be starting to look at solutions to the problems, the true source of hope biblically. And then fourth, we'll try to put some meat on the bones by way of application, think what does it all mean for us. So that's where we're headed. What is hope? The issue of hopelessness, or the problem of pain. The true source of hope biblically, and then what it all means as we put it together. So we're going to start this morning with that first lecture, what is hope? Now if you look at dictionaries, which is a good place to start when you're trying to find the definition of a particular word or concept, if you look at dictionaries in relation to this word, you will find that there's a consensus that says that hope is a feeling or an expectation or a desire for a particular thing to happen. And this is the common usage of the word. So it's an expectation, a desire, a feeling. I'd really like to see this happen. I really believe it will happen. So I've given you some examples here. Let me give you these sentences. So I'm phoning to you to let you know that I'm running a little bit late this morning for the meeting, but I hope I'm going to be there on time. So I'm phoning to let you know I'm running late, but I hope I'm going to get there on time. Here's another example. I'm a sports person. Let's imagine that. I'm a sports person. I'm trying out for the national team. And I hope I'm going to get selected. In fact, if I work really, really hard, because I'm at the top of my game, I might even make the Olympic team. So I really hope that I can get there. Third example. I'm making this financial investment, and I really hope it's going to do well. So in all of these cases, you see there is this desire. I really like to see something happen. There's a sense of expectation. Yes, I'm reaching out to grasp that, and I'm putting everything that I need into that to try to get my goal. And I regard this thing as good for me or good for others. So that's the general usage. That's how we use this term over and over and over again in our ordinary language. However, there is an archaic or old-fashioned definition of this word which is very interesting, and I think gets much more closely to what the Bible has to say on the subject. So if your dictionary is fairly detailed, you might find that down the bottom of a particular word there is archaic, and then there'll be another set of definitions. It gives you the old-fashioned definition of terms. And sure enough, in relation to hope, there is this old-fashioned definition that is associated much more with trust. It's associated with trust. It's something that orients toward another person. So, another example. I've got a pain in my side, and this has been bothering me for a long time. I haven't, but imagine, I've got a pain in my side, bothering me for a long time. I've decided that I'm going to go to the doctor. And when I go to the doctor, I have this hope that the doctor will be able to help me. Now, what am I basing that hope on? Well, I know this doctor. This doctor is very experienced. Now, he or she has been practicing medicine for a long, long time, and I have gone to him or her with other problems that I've had in my life, and this doctor has been amazing. So, based on that experience of this doctor's qualities and level of experience, I believe, I have the confidence, I trust that I'm going to have this problem resolved. Even if I didn't know this doctor very well, and this doctor wasn't as experienced, as a general thing, we know that doctors go into the profession in order to help people. They don't go into the profession in order to make people worse or give people even more problems. They go into the profession and they do all that study in order to assist people and help them out of their problems. So I have the general expectancy and confidence that this doctor will be able to help me. So this is a different understanding of hope. This is, in the other cases, it's sort of like, I've got a dartboard up here, I've got a dart, and I close my eyes and I hope against hope that I'm going to be able to hit that dartboard. In this other, more old-fashioned way of looking at the subject of hope, there is this element of trust. I'm extending a trust to someone else. And therefore I have the confidence that I will realise my goal. And as we'll see, I think this gets a lot closer to what the Bible means when it uses this term hope. Another way to try to get to what hope is to look at its absence. And when there isn't any hope, we use words like hopeless, irredeemable, incurable, irreparable. So this situation is hopeless. There is no possibility of getting through this. This situation cannot be redeemed. It's impossible. It's never going to get any better. I cannot be cured here. I have an incurable disease, so the doctors can't help me this time. This situation cannot be repaired. So what we're saying with all these words is that there's no possibility of things getting any better. No way to fix it. No way to repair the damage. And when hopelessness sets in, then there's despondency, discouragement, an acceptance of fate some people have. It's just the way it's got to be. Like Eeyore, in Winnie the Pooh, everything's always dour. And some people live like this in their hearts with a sense of hopelessness, and that's a terrible situation to be in. So this brings us to the second thing that I want to mention as we're introducing the topic of hope, and that is to ask the question, why is it so important? Why is it so important? And here I want to refer to Proverbs 13, verse 12. So let's just, if you've got your Bible, let's turn to this. Proverbs 13, verse 12. Now I'm going to read it here in the King James Version, just because I like the King James Version. I think it's done well in translating this verse, but I've also got an NIV in front of me as well that I'll be referring to. So Proverbs 13:12. Hope deferred maketh the heart sick, but when the desire cometh, it is a tree of life. Hope deferred maketh the heart sick, but when the desire cometh, it is a tree of life. So hope deferred means hope put off, right? It's the expectation or the desire is not received or realised. There's a disappointment, discouragement. Things don't go the way we're looking for them to go. And when this happens again and again, then real discouragement and disappointment can set in. And this proverb is saying that when this happens, the heart becomes sick. The heart becomes sick. Now, when we use the term heart, we often think of the emotions. We think of how we're feeling. I'm broken-hearted. Imagine a young man who is really interested in a young lady, and he plucks up courage to ask her out or something like that, and she says, "No, look, sorry, but I'm just..." And so he's devastated. He's broken. His confidence goes. He feels low. And it's not just young men. Let's say a young woman has been involved in a relationship with a young man for quite some time, and she's been thinking that things are going really, really well, and she wants to spend the rest of her life with this young man, and then he betrays her and he leaves her for somebody else, and she's broken-hearted. She feels really bad, and this is the way we often use the term heart. But in the Bible, the term heart, or the Hebrew term is lave. This term doesn't only refer to the emotions. This term lave in the Hebrew, the heart, also refers to what's going on up here, our minds. And I've given you a quotation here from a Jewish scholar by the name of Yoram Hazony. He's written some really interesting books, and this is from a book that he wrote called The Philosophy of Hebrew Scripture. He's discussing this term heart. And remember, we're looking at this because the proverb says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. It produces heart sickness. Okay, here's what he says. The Hebrew word lave, taken literally, refers to the physical organ we call the heart, and as a consequence, most translations use the word heart whenever the original Hebrew has lave. But in most cases, this translation misses the meaning of the biblical authors, and in many it leads to outright mistakes in translation. Classical Hebrew has no parallel to the later Western dichotomy or distinction between the heart as the seat of the emotions and the mind as the seat of the thought. For the biblical author's sentiments are a part of the process of human thought and reason, and not something separate from it. And when human beings are thinking or reasoning or believing, they do so with their lave, which is most directly translated as mind. So what this author is saying is, look, when it comes to this biblical term lave, we shouldn't do what we often do in the West and separate off the emotional level of being, how we're feeling about things, and what's going on with our minds, what we're thinking about things. This term lave in the Hebrew involves both those things, and we can't separate them. Now these days it's popular to say, how do you feel about this? How do you feel? When I've heard that sort of thing, I've often thought, you know what? I'm not so much concerned about what somebody is feeling about something. I'm much more interested in what somebody's thinking about something. Because what a person is thinking about something will often affect how he or she's feeling. And likewise, how a person is feeling is going to affect what he or she's thinking. So if I say the situation's hopeless, it is irredeemable, this is incurable, I'm expressing an idea, I'm saying something with my mind, and obviously my feelings are involved as well. Now what I'm saying might be accurate or not, but I'm definitely engaging my mind when I'm saying something like that. And so in the Hebrew, we should not separate these two things. So let's go back to our proverb against that background. Hope that's put off, that's never realised, a whole series of disappointments, leads to heart sickness. It leads not only to feeling bad, but it also leads to thinking very negative thoughts. Very destructive thoughts, very depressed thoughts and assessments. And we look at others and we look at the world, and we've got these things going through our whole being. And that's what hope deferred produces. But as is the case with many of these proverbs, it's often set up with a comparison and a contrast. So you get one idea stated, and then you get a comparison or contrasting idea stated at the other end. So hope deferred makes the heart sick. But the desire that's realised leads to the tree of life. The tree of life. And this is just the opposite of heart sickness. With the tree of life, we have to go back to Genesis 2, verse 9. So let's just go back to that. Genesis 2 and verse 9. The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We'll come back to that second tree a little bit later on in the series, but for the moment, the Lord made all the trees that are in the midst of the garden, and the tree of life is there and it's very good. So the tree of life is a source of life. And after Adam and Eve disobey God in Genesis chapter 3, they're expelled from this section of the garden, and they're no longer able to partake of the tree of life because it's associated with a life eternal. And if they're going to partake of life eternal, there's going to have to be another means to do that. They cannot do that directly. So the way to the tree of life is guarded, and they're expelled. So the tree of life is life. It's blessing, it's renewal, it's healing. But in Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve are expelled. They can't access the tree of life. At the end of the Bible, in Revelation 22, let's just turn to this. Revelation 22, the tree of life comes back. So it's at the beginning. These are the bookends of Scripture, right? And tree of life comes back right at the very end. So I'm going to read from verse 2. Down the middle of the street, the city, on each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations, and there's no longer going to be any curse. So you see what the tree of life is associated with in the Bible. In the book of Genesis, it's associated with life in all of its fullness, abundant life, life eternal. There isn't any curse associated with the tree of life. And then at the end of the book, in the new heavens and the new earth, we find that there's this river that goes out and waters the whole earth. And there's the tree of life there, and it's bearing fruit. And that fruit is for the healing of the nations. And there's no longer going to be any curse. So what happens in Genesis 3 is turned on its head. And the tree of life means absence of curse, wonderful blessing with God, life in all of its fullness, life the way it was supposed to have been in the first place before the fall. So, putting these ideas together and going back to our proverb, when there isn't any hope, when there's constant disappointments, when everything has to be put off, then there is heart sickness, a problem of the emotions and a problem of the mind combined. We can think very, very negative thoughts. We can curl in on ourselves. We can go into the fetal position. We can not want to face life anymore. It's the absence of life. But when hope is realised, when the desire is gained, and hope is there in all of its confidence, that's the tree of life. That's the opposite of heart sickness. That's life in all of its fullness. I can take on the world. And so, this matter of hope is really, we can put it in a nutshell, a matter of life and death. Getting this right is really a matter of life and death. And I want to say before we go on that this is not just for believers only. This is everybody made in the image of God. And last time I checked, that's everyone, right? We are all, as human beings, made in the image of God, whether we acknowledge God or not. And this is a truism that's important for everybody. Hope deferred produces heart sickness, but hope that's realised is the tree of life. Let me quote from a book by a guy called Johann Hari. This is a book called Lost Connections, and it was published in 2018. The point that we're making here is just how important this is for everybody and how pervasive the issues are that we all have to face. So he says, some 1 in 5 US adults are taking at least one drug for a psychiatric problem. Nearly 1 in 4 middle-aged women in the US is taking antidepressants at any given time. Around 1 in 10 boys in American high schools has been given a powerful stimulant to make them focus. And addictions to legal and illegal drugs are now so widespread that the life expectancy of white men is declining for the first time in the entire peacetime history of the United States. These effects have radiated out across the Western world. For example, as you read this, 2018, 1 in 3 French people is taking a legal psychotropic drug such as an antidepressant, while the UK has almost the highest use in all of Europe. Now, I don't have the precise statistics to assess the validity of those claims. He says he's done the research. And of course, statistics can be used to demonstrate anything. But I think we can safely conclude that there are many people in our society today that are struggling with what the Bible calls heart sickness, an absence of hope. And, you know, depression is very common. Maybe you know somebody who's depressed, and how difficult it is for people who are struggling with long-term depression actually to face life and get through it. Maybe you've been in that situation yourself. And so these are very, very real issues. These are very real problems. I'll say more about this later on as we look at the Bible's solutions to these kinds of problems. But the point that I'm making now is just how important our subject is. It is really a matter of life and death. And the Bible has a great deal to say about it for those reasons. So moving on quickly, let's go to the sources of hope. So we're not going to look at the true source of hope yet, that's coming. But we're going to look at some false sources of hope. Because this is such a pervasive issue, because heart sickness is such a very, very real problem for so many people in the world, people are looking for solutions, and they're grabbing onto things in order to deal with the problems that their heart sickness is producing. So some turn to alcohol and drugs. On a website called Recovery Connection, they list at least 10 top reasons why people use alcohol and other drugs, such as opioids. They include the management of pain, the dulling of pain, both physical and emotional, self-medication and loneliness. Another stated reason is that, at least in the short term, alcohol and drugs can make a person feel good. This is the opposite of feeling down and discouraged and hopeless. Again, though, we have to understand that the effects of these are short term. The pain comes back, reality sinks in again, and these solutions can become addictive and destructive, both personally and socially. But you can understand why people turn to these things, feeling so much pain, so much discouragement, so much sense of hopelessness, that they grab onto something that takes them out of their immediate way they're feeling and gives them something else for the short term. So alcohol and drugs. A second solution that some people use is various forms of escapism. Now here we can mention everything from watching a movie to reading a book, things that are not necessarily harmful, but again, do not necessarily change the reality. You know, once we get out of that, we've got to go back to face the real world. Some turn to online gaming and develop a persona, an avatar. And if they're not succeeding in their real life, they can succeed perhaps in the online gaming world, and they can have others look up to them. They're anonymous, but they can build a character, and it makes them feel better. And I tell you, if you're interested in the subject, you should talk to Joshua, because Joshua knows a lot more than I, not about gaming per se, but about where the industry is going in this respect, about how people can build these new persona. They can live alternative lives. They can dream alternative lives. And it's just amazing the way so much energy, technology, money is being poured into this kind of thing. And people increasingly are going to be using this as a form of escape. Some turn to pornography. This is immoral in and of itself. There's nothing good about it. It's inherently selfish and destructive. It's also addictive. But again, it makes people feel good. Others turn to things like Facebook and Instagram. This may seem a little bit strange, but studies have been done with respect to this. You click the like button. You click the like button, and you go back to look at what you've posted on Facebook and Instagram, and you see, oh, I've got 300 likes. And I've got this following. And that actually produces, I think it's dopamine. Produces dopamine. So it's addictive. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again. And it's all because my real life over there is really bad. My family, but here, I've actually got people who look up to me and they want to read what I'm going to post next. So I've got another life. I've got a form of escape out of this. Now, I'm not saying that all social media is bad or anything like that, but I'm saying that there are real traps with this. And the reason why we fall into these traps is because we've got this problem of dealing with life. And the issue of an absence of hope. And so you can see again just how important this subject is. So we've got alcohol and drugs. We have got various forms of escapism. Long list there. Powerful people. People don't have hope. Let's trust the government. The government will fix our problems. The Bible has something to say about this. Put not your trust in princes, nor in the Son of Man, in whom there is no help. So you do that, you are destined for a fall. But there are many people who do. We've got COVID in the world. We were going to have Kurios last year, but COVID hit. And Joshua rang up and said, Dad, we've had to postpone the conference. But we live in hope, and it was only a postponement, and we're having it now. But when COVID hit, that's affecting societies right around the world. So in what or whom are societies placing their hope? Well, it's in the heads of state who are in control of all these situations, and it's the medical profession. They will solve all of our problems for us. They'll tell us what to do, and they'll monitor us through this very challenging situation. Now, I'm pleased that there are heads of state who are making, Lord willing, wise decisions, and I'm really pleased for the medical profession. But what I'm saying is, it's a common thing to have people place their hope and trust in people who really can't give them what they're looking for ultimately. And sometimes the disappointment that brings can be devastating. Sometimes people in churches will place their hope and trust in their leadership and in their very famous minister who's got a world following. And to be in his congregation is just, wow, look at this. We are so blessed and privileged. And the next thing, they're reading the news. Big scandal. Crashing down, that man caught out. Devastation. If he falls like that, what hope is there for me? And it's just crashes. People crash down to reality. So anyway, powerful people, people in leadership, this often leads to a great deal of disappointment. Fourthly and lastly, money. It makes the world go round. And the more we've got of it, the fewer problems we will have. So people go for money, and they want money, and they think, it's just, if I could just get ahead, then I would have a much better life. I would be able to realize all my desires, and it would be wonderful. But of course it's not. And there are many very wealthy, powerful, influential people in the world who are struggling with heart sickness and broken lives and broken marriages and families. And the old adage, as the donkey says, celebrity marriages, they never last, do they? They never last. And so there is so much pain associated. Money is not the solution to everybody's problems, though many people are looking to that to deal with these issues and problems in their lives. Well, we could go on. The places that people go to find hope are many and varied. The book of Ecclesiastes has a great deal to say about this. You know, all the things that the preacher investigated and pursued. In the end, he says it's a bunch of vanity. It's worthless. We need another solution to this. So now, let's go to the Bible's response. What's the Bible going to have to say? And we'll be focusing on this in the rest of these talks. But just a little snippet here now. I want you to think about these statements. I'm going to read them. I'll read them slowly. I want you to think about them. All of them are found in the Bible. Number 1, let there be light. Number 2, let my people go. Number 3, as I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee. Number 4, behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall ye not know it? I will even make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Jacob. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. All of those statements are written in the Bible, and you may have noticed that we took a flying tour of the Bible. So we started out with Genesis chapter 1, let there be light. We ended up with the book of Revelation. I saw new heavens and a new earth. And all of these statements are in between. So we just took a flying survey through the Bible and picked out some statements, all of which are filled with hope and are calling us to place faith and trust not in ourselves, not in governments, not in drugs and alcohol, but in the speaker, the one who is speaking. All of these statements are calling us to trust, the old archaic word, meaning of hope. We're called to trust and put our confidence in the speaker. So really, Genesis through Revelation, this is constantly a theme in the Bible. So the question becomes, do you believe the person who's speaking? Do you actually trust him? If the answer is yes, then you have hope. This is why hope and faith in the Bible are closely connected, if not indistinguishable. They're really two sides of the same coin. Faith and hope. Faith, Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Faith, here's a definition. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. You see, faith and hope are linked. They're inseparable. We have to have faith in someone else. We have to have hope in someone else. And this is what the Bible has to say about this. Now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three. These are the three that really stand out. Faith, hope, and love. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 13. And so this is taking us back to the more archaic definition of the word of hope. It's not merely I hope against hope that my dart will hit the dartboard. No. It is a confidence. If you are speaking, Lord, if you are saying this, and I believe you, I trust you, then I can face the world. Then I can have confidence. Then I don't need to be curled up in the fetal position, unable to face life. Because I trust you. I believe you're going to do these things. And the Bible is inviting us, it's calling us to experience this, to place that hope and trust in the Lord. Well, I think that's just about it for today, for this lecture, but I want to close with a key text. Let's turn to Jeremiah chapter 17. Jeremiah 17. What have we got here? So, before I read this, a little bit of context. You probably know that Jeremiah was a prophet at a time when the Israelites were going through some very, very difficult times. We talk about heart sickness, discouragement, despair. Jeremiah lived through these times of the Babylonians coming to Jerusalem, besieging the city, destroying the temple, carting off large swaths of the people into exile. So these were really, really low times for the Old Testament people of God. And Jeremiah, sort of right in the middle of his prophecy in chapter 17, says in verse 12, "A glorious throne, exalted from the beginning, is the place of our sanctuary. O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away from you will be written in the dust, because they have forsaken the Lord, the spring of living water. Heal me, O Lord, and I will be healed. Save me, and I will be saved, for you are the one I praise." So, in the midst of all of these difficult, trying circumstances, where many of the people would say, it's hopeless for us now. Here's Jeremiah saying, "O Lord, you are the hope of Israel. You are the hope. And everybody who turns away from you will end up in heart sickness, discouragement, despair, and their names will be written in the dust." Why? Because they've forsaken the Lord. But when we trust in the Lord, there's healing, there's mercy, there's forgiveness, there's new life, and there's new hope. So you see how the Lord is called the hope of Israel. And so that sort of sums up in a nutshell everything that we've been talking about in this lecture. So what is hope? Why it's important? The source of it, we've just touched on this, orients to the speaker of these hopeful things in the Bible. And we've got to go back to him again and again and again if we are to have the tree of life in our lives, as it were.